How many players in baseball would you take over Juan Soto or Francisco Lindor? On the show today, we're going to look at a wild NBA trade that just went down and go through some hypotheticals to have a little bit of fun on this offseason edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the biggest story in sports right now is the fact that Luka Doncic just got traded from the Mavericks to the Lakers in exchange for Anthony Davis, a top 5 player at 25 years old in the NBA getting traded for a top 15 player, and that just does not happen much in any sport, and it pretty much never happens in Major League Baseball. So I thought we'd have a little bit of fun today because there's that question that's been thrown out there. What's the MLB comp to this trade? And we're going to talk about what the Mets comp would be right now if they were to trade Francisco Lindor, and that's not going to happen. Okay, this is a complete hypothetical show. It's a fun thought exercise on February 4th as we're still not quite at pitchers and catchers reporting, and most of the offseason tasks for the Mets are about complete. So we're going to have a little fun there. And I will, at the end of the show, just talk about the nature of moving on from a homegrown star and kind of tie this back to Pete Alonso a little bit. Not that he's anywhere near the player that Luka Doncic is, but just how that fan base is mourning right now. What would that be if Pete Alonso signs with the Blue Jays tomorrow? So we're going to go through a bunch of different stuff with this. But when it relates to a star-for-star trade in Major League Baseball, you just don't see it. You rarely ever see it. I would say most recently, the best example we got is what happened last year with Juan Soto, where Juan Soto goes from the Padres to the Yankees. Michael King comes back, and then they take the top prospect they got in that deal, and Drew Thorpe, and flip him for Dylan Cease. I mean, that's like the closest comparison of, a star player goes and stars come back. Dylan Cease, a star, I guess you could say. I mean, not to the same degree of a Juan Soto, not to the degree of an Anthony Davis, and if you're crossing sports, but it's a win now trade. And you just don't see a lot of that typically in Major League Baseball. If a star gets moved, it is the signal that a franchise is moving into a rebuild, that they are turning things over and they're going in a completely different direction. If the Mavericks had held out until the offseason or that they had opened it up to more teams to trade for Doncic and they got 7 first-round picks, like that type of a deal. We just saw that with Soto a couple of years ago, where he went from the Nationals, the team that he won a World Series with, to the Padres at a trade deadline, and the Nationals got a monster return. And you know what? That trade has worked out really well for the Nationals. They have James Wood now, 4 years later, ready to assume the Juan Soto role of a young stud corner outfielder. They've had C.J. Abrams and Mackenzie Gore contributing at the big league level for the last couple of years, and a couple of their prospects on the way, and Robert Hassel III and Harlan Susana. Luke Voigt was also in that trade, not that that matters, but you look at, as was actually Josh Bell going from the Nationals to the Padres. But that was a star player who was young, getting dealt, gutting a fan base, but it was a move towards the future. Mookie Betts got traded a little bit before that from the Red Sox to the Dodgers. Again, it was a prospect-based return. So to try to find a actual comparison of a trade that went down in Major League history that is similar to what just happened in the NBA, I think there's really one good example of it. I know other people have pointed it out. That's when Alex Rodriguez got traded from the Rangers to the Yankees. And really, it's the trade that actually could have happened before that would have been the more direct comparison. And that's when A-Rod was supposed to go to the Red Sox before he ended up with the Yankees. You might not remember this, but back after the 2003 season, Alex Rodriguez was going to get traded from the Rangers to the Red Sox for Manny Ramirez and a pitching prospect named John Lester. Now, that trade, which brings us down a whole different multiverse in Major League Baseball. And I think it's way more exciting. But instead of that happening, the MLBPA nixed the deal because A-Rod was going to take a pay cut to go to the Red Sox. And the MLBPA doesn't like players taking anything less than their max value. Certainly don't want them to take a cut on already agreed upon money. So that trade got killed. It seemed like A-Rod was going to stay with the Rangers. I believe he was named team captain. And then all of a sudden, there was an injury to Aaron Boone, now the current manager of the Yankees. He hurt his knee playing pickup basketball, and the Yankees had a need at third base. They traded Alfonso Soriano for Alex Rodriguez. Alfonso Soriano, a really good player in his own right. That is even some type of a close comparison, but Soriano wasn't a top 15 player in baseball, I don't believe, at the time. A-Rod was the best player in baseball, but that's sort of the most recent or the closest, I guess you could say, comparison of star for star trade, or just a shocking trade where a star player got moved. And if you have others, please hit me with those in the comment section. But now, as we look towards the Mets currently, what would this be for the Mets fan base right now? What trade could happen tomorrow that would hit the fan base like a ton of bricks, but you could look at the final picture of the roster and say, oh, maybe it's better. And I'm not saying that for the Mavericks. And look, if you want any coverage on the NBA side of things, that's the awesome thing about the Locked On Podcast Network. We have so many shows on, showing every team. And so I haven't, been a longtime listener of Locked On Mavericks, but I know they do good work. And when this went down, I've been listening to Locked On Mavs the last couple of days because it's really interesting to hear about the fallout of this trade. And that led me to wanting to talk about this through a Mets lens today. So now, again, circling back to what a Mets Luka Doncic-esque trade would be, I think you'd have to be talking about a Francisco Lindor trade because this fan base is not emotionally connected yet to Juan Soto. And with all due respect to Brandon Nimmo, there's no homegrown player that the Mets fan base would lose sleep over trading at this point. So Lindor would be the guy coming off a near MVP season where he dragged that team into the playoffs and had huge moment after huge moment along the way. Imagine tomorrow, the Mets trade Francisco Lindor. Where could he go where this would be a fair enough comp? And I think the trade that made the most sense to me is the team that everybody would hate for Lindor to go to, a team that gets everybody, and a team that happens to be in the same market that the Lakers are in, the Dodgers. So if Francisco Lindor gets traded tomorrow to the Dodgers, and again, this is not real. This is fake. It would never happen in a million years. But imagine this one. Lindor gets traded from the Mets to the Dodgers for Freddie Freeman. There's your star for star. Freddie Freeman is the Anthony Davis in this trade, Tommy Edman, and Dustin May. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because the Mavericks and their GM really believe that they are getting better in the short term. They have a better chance to win a title with Anthony Davis as their best player than Luka. And so despite the fan outrage and really breaking the heart of a fan base, they pulled the trigger on a trade strictly thinking about the X's and O's. So that's where I came up with this comparison trade, because Freddie Freeman for Francisco Lindor is somewhat on the same length as far as, star for star. And then the other stuff on top, making the Mets a better team altogether. So Freddie Freeman makes up for the loss of Lindor's offense. And you can say Freddie Freeman is a better hitter than Francisco Lindor. Now, that can be an argument for sure, especially last year. Lindor had a better season. But if you look at the last 3-4 years, you could say Freddie is just a better overall offensive player, strictly offense. You fill a hole at first base, and then Tommy Edman replaces Lindor at shortstop, giving you close to the level of defense you're getting from Lindor. Lindor is clearly better, but Tommy Edman has put up insane defensive metrics at shortstop. So you wouldn't fall off defensively too much. Tommy Edman is at least a league average offensive player, gets you a lot in the base pass. And your first round pick comparison is Dustin May, giving you an upside arm for your starting rotation. I think that the Mets would actually be a slightly better team next year if that crazy, insane, never in the world's going to happen trade took place. The Dodgers still get the best player in the deal. And because it's the Dodgers, they could go out, they could sign Alex Bregman or Pete Alonso to just end up getting that much better if they wanted to. But they would be looking at that trade and say, hey, well, you know what? Francisco Lindor and Mookie Betts up the middle for the next 5 years, with Mookie at second, Lindor at short, and Ohtani as your two-way superstar, not a bad team to build. So that was my crazy what's an MLB comp for this happening. It never would, but it does give me a jumping off point that I think is a little more interesting, a little more relevant to the Mets next season and for the next couple of seasons. How many players in Major League Baseball would you actually take over Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto? We're going to go through that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field in the app. Super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so how many players in Major League Baseball are better than Juan Soto? I have been going through for just baseball recently, and we've been doing a bunch of top 10 lists, top 10 players at each position, and I am now ranking the top 15 players in Major League Baseball. So I actually just did this exercise, and here's what I came up with. I think going into 2025, Juan Soto is the 5th best player in Major League Baseball. Obviously, Ohtani's 1, Aaron Judge is 2, Bobby Witt Jr., after what was it, a 10-win season last year, I'm putting him 3rd, although he's got to do it again, but unbelievable season. And then I got Mookie Betts with a slight edge over Juan Soto because he's a more complete player. He does bring something defensively that Juan Soto does not. If we're talking about who's the best hitters in baseball, I might edge Soto into the top 3 with Ohtani and Judge. I think he's right behind those guys, and he has the chance in any given year to be the best hitter in Major League Baseball. That is how good he is. I think there's a lot of Yankees fans last year that would have said, certainly in the playoffs, but even before that, that if the game was on the line, Juan Soto is the guy they wanted up because he just gives you such a complete at-bat. So if we're talking about trade value, now no one's going to trade for a $765 million contract, so that's kind of a null and void conversation, but there really are only a few players that are even in that tier. Juan Soto is a tier 1 superstar in Major League Baseball. That is the group. I think there's a clear separation between the top 5 and then the next 5 in my top 10. And in my opinion, Soto is at the tail end of it, but he has every chance to be better than Mookie Betts this year and better than Bobby Witt Jr. Now, Bobby Witt is not a guy that I would sell low on his stock or sell high on his stock. I think he can just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. I think Bobby Witt has the chance to be the best position player in baseball, setting Ohtani's two-way status aside. So I don't say that I think Soto will necessarily be better than Bobby Witt this year, but I think he has the capability in any given year to rise his game to a level that a few players could even match. As we get beyond that and look more towards Francisco Lindor, how many more players beyond that top 5 are better than Lindor heading into this season? I honestly think there's only one. Call me crazy, and we're going to go through the names, but the one that I would say that you can make a case being better than Lindor is Gunnar Henderson. Now, we just ranked top 10 shortstops over at Just Baseball. I was one of 2. My boy Leo Morgenstern, I think it was, came through as well. We have 6 panelists that vote on all these players, and then we take an aggregate score to come up with our top 10 rankings. There was 2 of us that had Lindor 2nd, myself and Leo, and then the other 4 had Lindor 3rd, Gunnar 2nd. So Gunnar was our number 2 overall shortstop in baseball behind Bobby Witt. And rightfully so. Gunnar had an amazing season, 37 homers. He definitely has more power than Lindor, 21 stolen bases, 155 WRC plus Lindor's, and that's weighted runs created plus. It measures hitters on a league average of 100 Lindor had a 137 WRC plus. So he was 18 points worse in WRC plus. WAR, they're pretty much the same. Gunnar had an 8-win season. Lindor 7.8. Gunnar is a good defensive shortstop, not great like Lindor, but he gives you a much better, at bat altogether. He's going to get on base at a better clip. He's going to hit for a higher average, and he does have more power he can tap into. He faded, though, in the second half last year. And that coincides with the Orioles as a team sort of fading, where Francisco Lindor, we saw it, he got better and better and better. And I think when it comes to this upcoming season, and players in baseball I would want on a winning team more than Lindor, that list shortens for me. Because what Francisco Lindor proved last year is he knows how to win and win in New York. And that is a trait that few players have. I would say Lindor has that more than Aaron Judge. Now, Judge is going to put up gargantuan numbers in the regular season. He's a better player. Yankees fans don't have to come at me on that one. But when it comes to being a leader and getting more of the guys around him, is Aaron Judge going to do that this year without Juan Soto? Or is he going to need a Paul Goldschmidt to step up as a leader and help guide that team? Cody Bellinger, those veterans that were brought in, is it going to be collective? I think it probably is. I don't know if Aaron Judge, as the captain of the Yankees, is pulling the rope with his guys and getting more out of the guys around him the same way Lindor just did. And so when I think about Lindor's value that he adds to your franchise as a guy that's going to play every day, not that Gunnar doesn't do that, but lead his team and know how to navigate the ebbs and flows of the season, I would take Lindor over Gunnar, even though I think the larger portion of analysts for Major League Baseball would say Gunner's better right now, right? So I think that's sort of it. I think that there's a grouping of the top 7 players in Major League Baseball, and the Mets have 2 of them. And then if you look beyond that, the guys that are outside of that round up my top 10, you got Jose Ramirez, consistency every year, 40-40 nearly last year, unbelievable player, but I still like Lindor a little bit more. Bryce Harper just doesn't do it on the defensive side. He's now playing first base. So the value is just not the same as a shortstop. Can you tell me that Bryce Harper's a better hitter than Lindor? Yes. So if there's a Bryce Harper fan in here that's saying, hey, Harper is better than Lindor, I wouldn't fight you to the death over it. I think Lindor is a better player at this stage of their careers. But again, Harper is awesome. And then you have Ronald Acuna Jr. And I'm sure that when we get to these rankings on the site, people are not going to like where I have Acuna for the top 10 players in baseball or also the top 10 players in the National League East, having him behind both Lindor and Harper. The reason that I have Acuna there, for one, if we're talking about trade value side of it, while Acuna's on this incredible contract, he's now blown out both knees. So what does that look like? But also, if you look at his career, how many seasons has he had that have been 5-win seasons? He is, at this point, 7 years into his career. Granted, he's been hurt a couple times, and so that definitely changes things. There's been 2 years where he's played at that insane elite level, maybe 3. 2019, he was a 4.8 win player. But you look at 2021, he was on an 8-win pace, got hurt. And then you had his MVP season where he was remarkable. Last year, he wasn't doing great before he went down. Look at 2022 coming off the injury. Acuna's a tough player to judge. As I literally started talking myself down off the take, as I sort of go through the excuses a little bit more, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, he only had a 4.4 win season in 2021, but 82 games. You talk about what he did in 2023. Lindor has never reached those heights. So I think Acuna, if he proves health again, he probably does vault up this list and probably does take a spot next to Juan Soto. He could be better than Juan Soto when he's at his best. Absolutely. So he's definitely someone that I think you could have an argument over. And then beyond that, you have Kyle Tucker, kind of outside looking in guys, Ellie De La Cruz, Yordan Alvarez is just a bat. Ketel Marte had an awesome season. Vladdy, obviously, with the bat. There's a lot of good players in Major League Baseball, but I think if we really are ranking the top players in the game heading into 2025, the Mets have 2 clear-cut, no doubt about it, top 10 players in the game. They have one guy that I think is a top 5 player in the game and one that I think is a little bit higher up in that second tier. So to me, if you look at the strength of the Mets that has not been talked about nearly enough as we head towards 2025, it's the fact that you have two players that are that good. And I really want to spend some time as we start gearing up for the season, really focusing on that. Who's going to have a better season between Lindor and Soto? We'll talk about that for a show. Where does that duo stack up against the best in the game? Obviously, you have the Dodgers duo of, I guess, Ohtani and Betts, but are there any others that come close to what Lindor and Soto could be? There really is a lot of meat in the bone when we're talking about what that duo could bring to the Mets this season. And even if you go into Mets history, how many times the Mets have had two players this good? It's going to make this a really exciting season. Last part of the show, though, is Pete Alonso going to be part of it? I know we've talked about it a lot, but as I am watching a fan base mourn the loss of a homegrown star player, I felt like it was interesting to tie those two things back together to close out the show. So we're going to do that in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Now I know I'm going to get some comments. How could you ever compare Luka to Pete Alonso? And I'm not. I'm really not. But it has been really interesting to watch the coverage on Locked On Mavs as a fan base is mourning a guy that was so important to everything that it meant to be a Mavericks fan over the last couple of years. And I think anyone who's been listening to this show this offseason has probably seen me in real time sort of grappling with that when it comes to Pete Alonso, because I started covering this team on this show in 2019. Very similar to how Locked On Mavs has sort of been built up following the career of Luka Doncic. In a lot of ways, Locked On Mets has been following the career of Pete Alonso. And over time, Pete has been less and less integral to the New York Mets. When you bring in a Francisco Lindor, he becomes your best player. And I think last year, Lindor really superseded Alonso as the clear-cut face of the franchise. But Pete has been a face of this franchise. And I think what's interesting to me looking at how the Luka thing went, it was betraying the homegrown star, trading him without telling him, sending him off when he had no idea that a trade was going to happen, and a fan base reacting to that. Luckily for this situation with Alonso, it's free agency. Pete would be choosing another team, and we have been preparing for this for months now if Pete does decide to sign somewhere else. But I ask you, what do you want the end of Pete Alonso's tenure to be? Are you happy with the ending he just got? It's not a bad one. Huge home runs in the playoffs, the biggest one of his career, one of the biggest in franchise history, getting the Mets to get past the Brewers and go on a really awesome, fun ride through the playoffs that resulted in beating the Phillies in 4 games at home, and all the feel good that the fan base got out of that. Pete having a monster postseason. He was fantastic and good all the way through. That can be the end, though. And let's say the Mets say, you know what, the price isn't worth it. And he moves on, and they roll with Brett Beatty and Ronnie Mauricio at third base, and one of those kids takes over, and Vientos fills the gap at first. And that duo of Soto and Lindor is outstanding, and both of those guys put up near MVP seasons. Maybe Juan Soto wins an MVP, and the Mets make the playoffs. Maybe they win the NL East, and they go through the whole ride, and they win the World Series. Are fans going to be thinking about Pete Alonso at the end of that rainbow? Are they going to be thinking about, man, it's kind of crazy that Pete didn't get to enjoy this ride? I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the extent of what would happen if the Mavericks won an NBA title, where that fan base is literally torn to pieces right now. It's just, you can't compare the two. But I do think that David Stearns and Steve Cohen could learn a little bit about the importance of a homegrown star in these circumstances where I would not be quibbling over, pennies. Like I would not, if you have a hard line in the sand that Pete Alonso is worth 3 years and $75 million and 3 years, 80 gets it done. as much as you could say it's an overpay, but like it's not a fair enough. It doesn't make sense as a viable conversation because I don't think that 3 years, $80 million offer is on the table from anyone else. But let's just say, tomorrow the Angels step up because Artie Moreno is just bored and he says, you know what? Why not? I got money. I'll sign Pete Alonso. He has a phone call with Mike Trout. Are you healthy? And Mike Trout says, yeah, of course, Artie. I'm ready to go. I'm fired up for spring training. I look great. And they're just naive and stupid. And they say, all right, here we go. $80 million. And Boras says, all right, we are going to take this offer if you don't match. Do I think the Mets should match in that instance? It's a scenario that I don't think happens. But ultimately, when you really think about the alternatives, I just do wonder, how much are you losing by giving up on a homegrown guy? And I know there's a lot of Mets fans that are saying you're not losing much and Pete's on the decline and all that other stuff. I don't think you're being sincere if you think the Mets are a better baseball team without Pete Alonso next season. Now, you can be wary about giving him long-term years and all that, but I really think that if you look at the next era of Mets baseball, where you have 2 top 10 players in the game, I think you finally have a team that Pete Alonso is perfect for. You finally have a team where Pete Alonso does not have to be the engine. Pete Alonso does not have to be the guy day in, day out. But if he's the guy a lot of times and he's hitting a lot of home runs, there's a lot of traffic in front of him on the bases with 2 top 10 players in the game. And Pete Alonso is a feared bat in the middle of your lineup that can have a big series. And when Lindor's bat goes cold in the NLDS and maybe Soto's getting pitched around, Pete Alonso hits a couple huge 3-run homers and you get past a Dodgers team that no one thinks you're going to beat. I think there are a lot of big moments yet to come for Pete Alonso in a Mets uniform. And when you see the alternative of a homegrown star leaving over reasons that might not be entirely justifiable, it just brings it back to my mind like, what are we really doing here in this 2.5-month standoff over a contract? Why can't these sides find some freaking middle ground and get a deal done? Because the 2025 New York Mets are going to be a lot more fun with Pete Alonso on it. And I honestly think the team would be a lot more fun with him on it for the next couple years beyond that. I really do. But we'll see what happens there. Overall, I thought this was a fun topic for the show today, or set of topics, to take the biggest story in sports and put it through a Mets lens. So I hope you all enjoyed a little bit of a zany podcast that we're not going to typically do on this show. I will get back to some more 2025 Mets content tomorrow, really thinking about this upcoming season. I'm not sure if we're going to talk about top duos in baseball and spend a little more time on Lindor and Soto, or if I'm going to focus more on if the Mets have enough starting pitching. So we're going to be talking about those things throughout the week this week. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.